Good morning, exiles, and welcome back for another Q&A session with none other than Chris Wilson. Good morning, Chris. Thank you for joining us once again.
Oh, thanks for being here as well.
Part of Exile gets to be so many things. It has gotten to be so many things over the years. Do you ever really feel like you just don't need to make another game in any other genre because you can just make a league that is that genre? Like make a farming league or a city building league or a roguelike league?
I guess that's one perk of the job, but we always try to make sure that when we're designing our leagues, they're games that fit within the idea of being an action RPG. Like they have to involve you killing monsters and finding items in order to fit within Path of Exile.
Yeah, so even when you're farming, you're killing monsters, or even when you're fishing, you're killing monsters. I look
Yeah,
forward to
there's
the
a
one where we pull
bit of an
monsters out of the
agenda
water.
there, Ziggy.
I was planning on pushing the fishing angle.
So that's when you get on the boat and have your fishing league, right?
And you like pull monsters out of the water, right? Like giant fish that you then battle with as they flop around on the deck. That makes sense.
Interesting. That one's under NDA, sorry.
Oh, I'm in trouble. How do you gain access to the new Forbidden Sanctum?
So basically, every area you're playing in has a portal that gives you access to it. It basically takes you to the next room that you're playing in the Sanctum in your current run.
Ah, okay. So to clarify then, the Sanctum's divided into rooms, each with their own encounter, and then floors with a boss at the end of each. And then there's the whole Sanctum itself, which is multiple floors?
That's right. So the Sanctum itself has 4 floors, each one guarded by a boss at the end, with the ultimate boss fight at the end of the 4th floor. And each of the floors has 8 rooms, and so a maximum length Sanctum run would be 32 consecutive rooms, which you'd play out over potentially 32 maps. But it's worth emphasizing that, as with most roguelikes, you don't just install it and then happily play through to the end in one go. It's something that you get further and further with each run as you get better meta progression, as you learn more about it, and as you have good versus bad runs.
I presume it like level scales to the character kind of as you're leveling still, as per
Yes.
regular leagues. Is
Mhm.
there any potential, do you think, that someone who's like quite good at the game maybe gets through on their first try, or is this quite definitely you're gonna have to make it a bit further each time?
We never underestimate the players, right? Like we
Yeah.
will try as hard as we can to achieve something, and then players will just blow right past that because there are millions of them and they're pretty damn good at the game. So I don't want to make any promises there, but it certainly is the case that in order to get really deep into the Sanctum, you have to know a lot about it. You have to have some experience with it. You have to ideally have a good character with a capable build. You'd ideally have a good setup of your relics, which are the meta progression. To get to the deeper floors, it certainly requires that you've assembled relics that fit with your strategy. And it also helps to be having a good run. I can't emphasize that enough. It's very roguelike, where you're picking up these random boons, these random afflictions. And if you get the bad afflictions on you early on, that run is not going to last long. If you get a really good set of boons, you could have a really deep run, much further than you otherwise would at your current level.
This is so you mentioned like 30 something rooms. That's like the biggest thing we've had by a pretty substantial margin. Because even building the temple was around 11 maps to build a full temple and then run that. And that was like that's a pretty sizable thing. So this is a lot bigger than that then.
That's correct, but a lot of the rewards you're getting along the way, and so it's entirely fine to play the Sanctum a few floors in and then fail and play again, and it's still a rewarding experience, assuming you don't gamble on pushing the rewards right to the end of the entire Sanctum run. But it's unlikely you're going to choose to do that until you are really confident in your ability to do this run particularly well.
Yeah, so I saw the reward options are like take a tiny reward now, take a decent reward at the end of the floor. So you're like, oh, I can make it 3 or 4 more rooms. And
Yeah.
then there's the really big one at the end as well. And those
Yes.
stack right if you get a bunch of them.
That's right, and it was kind of funny because in the live stream I said this is a massive reward, and we're showing like a few chaos orbs as the reward. So of course, chat memed that as much as they could. The thing is, okay, so let's do some math here, right? It's 32 rooms in a Sanctum run, and deferrals make up something like 40%. Deferral is what I'm internally calling the offer reward here. It makes up around 40% of the rooms. And
Wow.
so if you're offered an average of a whole bunch of chaos orbs, I think the example there had like 18, but obviously the currency numbers will vary a lot, then and you were to defer those entirely to the end of the Sanctum run, you would be getting hundreds of currency. And it can have divines, mirrors, and various other stuff in there moderately rarely. So it's entirely possible that were you to defer everything to the end in a big gamble, you could receive a very, very large payout. Now, of course, deferring it to the end of the Sanctum is a crazy strategy. We don't recommend that. It will end in tears. Only do this if you're confident in this run. It's set up so that the rewards for immediately taking them are still worthwhile. If you played the Sanctum and just took the reward immediately, it's a decent amount of currency that makes it worthwhile on top of the other rewards you're getting. But there's always the temptation of the end of the floor. The floor one is the one that's juiced a little bit. Of course, in later floors, the end of the Sanctum doesn't look very far away, and if you know you're having a good run, you've got confidence, then why not take the extra reward by doing the big gamble?
This deferral mechanic's super interesting actually, because you've designed leagues where you get like some reward immediately, and then you've designed leagues where you do like a lot of content and then get a ton of rewards all at once.
Mhm.
So but this allows players to have control over that mechanic and make that decision
Right.
for themselves.
And
Have
this
you
is
like kind of yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say, this is because roguelikes have good runs and bad runs. If you're having a bad run, take the rewards
Right.
now and get as far as you can. If you're having a great run, that gives you the ability to make an ultimatum like gamble.
Yeah, right. You can make those strategic decisions kind of based on like this has been a brutal slog. I am no way am I getting through this. I'm gonna check out now. Got it. Makes sense. Have you thought about like the player mindset of just like I always gonna take the big one? Because I look at it and I'm like I'm always gonna take the one, and I'm the biggest one. I'm never gonna get it because I'm always gonna die.
Obviously, players want to min-max stuff. They want to get the best result, but the best result may pragmatically say, I'm going to take this reward that's in a shorter time frame. Plus, okay, so anyone who's done economics or finance understands the concept of the time value of money. $1 now is worth more than $1 later because you can put it to use right now. And when these full Sanctum runs taking 30 maps, maybe getting a pile of chaoses, potentially some higher currency like exalts and divines, a few maps from now is actually better for your character development than getting a very large pile in 20 maps. Maybe, especially when there's a conditional element to that. It may be that getting something a few maps from now that you can then trade to get more progression is actually better for you. So there are a lot of hard decisions which we put on the table here for the players.
Damn, I'm gonna have to dig out my old economics textbooks.
Path of
Okay.
Excel, right?
Yeah, now you're speaking our language. Let's talk the resolve mechanic. So to clarify, resolve is an independent health bar for the
Yes.
Forbidden Sanctum specifically, and when your resolve runs out, you're kicked out of the Sanctum, dead or not, right?
That's correct. Now, I noticed the reaction when we're announcing the resolve system there, as a lot of players said, why? As though this is a negative thing, but I want to have a chance to explain it. So, we tried very hard initially to work out a system here that works with your player life. Then there's no additional bars. The problem is, though, Path of Exile's player life fluctuates up and down rapidly. You're constantly healing yourself, you've got recovery, there's no persistence to this. Your player life is like how out of breath you are, if you see what I mean. It's a very brief, it's almost like your heartbeat to some extent. And so, if we were to say, look, if you lose some life in this room, then when you come back into the next room, that life is going to be missing. So, you've got a kind of a progression through the sanctum. Then they just press one and heal themselves fully and carry on playing. And so, our experiments where there's no meta progression in it do not function as a roguelike. There has to be a thing where you get worn down. Having said that, half of the plan here, half of the strategy you have to do in your sanctum is work out how you are recovering your resolve. And there are lots of different ways. It's along the lines, I mean, it's as simple as if your resolve is lower than you'd like because the sanctum one is one you're struggling with, then you have to start pathing through various things like fountains or choosing boons which enable more resolve recovery. And every time you have to choose something focusing on resolve recovery, you're implicitly losing some other thing you could be getting, like more rewards or a different axis of power. And so the degree to which you're struggling with the run forces you to focus on staying alive and not getting rewards. But conversely, this means if you're having a good run where you are not struggling at all, you can just kind of ignore your resolve and focus on becoming super powerful. And this works really well as a roguelike. And I would really encourage people to try it out before judging it based on the fact that it's an additional life bar. We don't add those kind of things, for no reason. And it means as well that you don't have as much pressure on your actual player life. And it's very interesting how build agnostic this is because it creates a situation where different Path of Exile players can experience the Sanctum in similar ways, despite the fact their builds play quite differently.
This is why this Q&A is super good to do because you get a chance to explain this, like how you arrived at this design decision that you can't really do in the reveal because it would
Yeah, it'll
bog
take a
down
while.
the reveal for like 10 minutes. So that's super interesting. You actually touched on a topic I wanted to ask. So Resolve seems to reward high mobility play styles that can completely avoid attacks. So since mitigation doesn't affect resolve damage, how does it feel playing like a low mobility tanky melee character in the Sanctum when you kind of just be failing runs due to chip damage that otherwise is not a threat to you?
We thought of that. So we've made it so that the resolve damage is lower if you're close to a target. Essentially, if you're melee and you're right in their face, then you take less resolve damage than if you're further away. And so attacks are also very telegraphed. And that means that even if you're a tanky melee character, you have an opportunity to get out of the way. You probably should consider at least a Quicksilver Flask if you're going into the Sanctum so that you have some ability to respond to stuff, but that's normal Path of Exile play. Even in Ruthless, where there's significantly less mobility skills, Quicksilver Flasks still exist. The other thing is, if your build is one where you're expecting to take a lot of resolve damage, just spec your relics into resolve recovery. Relics are your meta progression that you can choose. They're locked in for the Sanctum run, and you keep them between runs. So if you feel that you want more resolve recovery, get relics that do that. And if you're a character that's given up mobility, has some ability at the expense of maybe less damage or less tankiness or something, then there are other things they can specialize their relics into if they have enough resolve.
That taking less damage at close range thing is super interesting. Is that like kind of a fast shot mechanic applied to projectile attacks or something?
It's like that for all of the resolve stuff, and this is
Yeah.
something that we've realized is necessary because the melee and tanky characters get up close, and so it's better for that to be balanced around it.
All right, cool. And just to clarify for people, if you are playing hardcore, this means you can fail the Sanctum without dying. So I was like, I thought it
That's
was a
correct.
hardcore league.
Right. The intention of the Forbidden Sanctum is that you will fail your Sanctum many, many times on the path to finding all of the good stuff in it. And so if that meant the hardcore character was dead and had to start again, it just wouldn't be a hardcore compatible league. And
Yep.
so a side effect of Resolve is that hardcore characters can actually engage with it without putting themselves in mortal danger. It also means, of course, with the way that experience penalties work, high level characters can play without putting their current experience so much on the line. I mean, it's still very, I mean, I've died in the Sanctum numerous occasions with legitimate player life deaths because I was careless, but
Mm.
it's certainly easier from a player life point of view than, say, high level mapping is.
Well, that kind of speaks to the concept of resolve as a whole. It's resolve is about your how well you've done over the course of the entire dungeon, whereas your
Yes.
health is how well you've done in this specific engagement, which is
Yeah,
an interesting kind of like two-faceted approach that we don't normally have in Path of Exile. Like if you
that's
do bad
correct.
at the start of a map, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the rest of the map, right?
Yeah, and it's also meant that if we want something to be dangerous, we up the resolve a bit, we don't up its damage, threatening the actual characters.
Interesting. Cool. All right. So to clarify on the sanctified relics, these are the
Mhm.
ones where the effects work on your character outside of the sanctum.
That's correct. Yeah, both inside and outside. So these are a permanent power progression for characters. They're hard to get. They're very end game. You know, we're talking late maps here, and they're obviously due to the fact that they can't be crafted and can't be traded means that you are very limited in how many of these you get access to. But they are very powerful, and because of the fact that they can't be crafted or traded, we've made sure to juice the mods on them and make sure it's not watered down. These are relics which will significantly affect the character power of your build. Now, they are shared among all the characters on your account, or meaning you can
Oh,
equip, from the same pool. So it does mean that if you find one for one character and you want to use it on a different build, it's entirely possible to.
how does the sanctum work in a party then?
Got a bunch of rules here. Short answer is, as with all recent leagues, we want party play to work, but we also want it so that people don't feel encouraged to cheese things through party play. And so the philosophy basically is like one of the problems with archnemesis with the whole culling situation is that players realize when they find a certain monster that, oh, I now have to engage with other humans in order to get maximum result here. And we want Sanctum to work in a party without creating the feeling that you have to engage with humans in order to get the best out of your Sanctum. It shouldn't feel like you only want to go in there when you have a whole bunch of friends who are online at the same time. So we've come up with rules that enable you to play as a party, and certainly there are some benefits for doing so, but there is also some liability to it. And so the way it works is the sanctum is always that of the map owner. The person who created the map is the one whose sanctum you are playing. So if Ziggy and I are playing and we're doing Ziggy's sanctum, he's the one getting the progress for that. I'm there to help. And afterwards, it would be nice if he reciprocated and we did my sanctum as well. But it's primarily your one that's progressing. And so this means that you are the one who makes the choices about stuff. This is the one, it's your relics matter there. We're using your gold, your boons, your afflictions, and your resolve bar. That's the important thing to note. If you
Mm.
invite other party members into your sanctum with you, they don't just get a free ability to have their own resolve bar, which doesn't matter, or they can run around and distract the monsters. You are, as a party, sharing the resolve bar with the map owner. And this means that extra party members can't just go and suicide themselves on stuff to distract the monsters. They actually have to be playing properly. Party member deaths do not end the current run, so if they happen to die legitimately, that doesn't screw up what you're doing. There's a bunch of other small rules there, like party members can view the merchant and view the map, but only the map owner actually makes the choices and purchases stuff. In practice, what this means is it's fun to bring people in and play together. It does give you a small advantage from a combat point of view if you have multiple players, but you do all have to be playing cohesively. So only bring in party members you trust. You can also drop party members in and out. So by that I mean, like, I can play this room with Ziggy and the next one with someone else, and because it's sharing my resources, that's compatible without having to have like a party resolve bar that's reserved for a specific group of people and so on.
All right. So if I bring a viewer in and they want to sabotage me, they can run in front of all the monsters.
Yep,
Great.
that would
So
be
good.
hilarious. You guys should do that.
Please,
Hmm.
please. Okay. We got a couple of chat questions on the mechanics here specifically as well. Also, I just wanted to add another one. When you die in the Sanctum via resolve death,
Yes.
and your character flops on the ground like a fish,
Hmm.
are you fully protected from taking any damage from any source dots, anything like that? You guys have checked, right?
Yes. I
Okay.
checked this yesterday. I'll read it to you. Cannot be damaged. Minions take no actions. You have grace period. Dealt no damage. Minions have no damage. Minions cannot be damaged. There's a whole bunch of stuff.
Good.
You're
Okay,
protected.
cool. Excellent. Just had to make 100% sure. We didn't want any people like, I fell over in the Sanctum and then I died when I couldn't control my character. Losing a resolve death, TK Hectic asks, is your XP lost or is your XP protected?
My belief is, correct me if I'm, yeah. So that was the dev check. You don't lose experience if you fail out through the resolve, and that's because it isn't actually a death. It doesn't increase the deaths count. You don't lose experience. You don't lose hardcore characters. It's entirely basically fainting and being ejected. The structure is that every room. So the basic way it works is you take the portal and you appear in a small antechamber, which enables you to make a choice. You click on
Mm.
the map, have a look at what the options are of where you want to go next. You can look a few ahead, and you lock in a choice. And then a door, one of the three doors, or up to three doors in that room, slides open. So you go through. Now you're in the actual main sanctum room. So you do whatever the objective is in there, which may be just getting to the exit or killing the guards or whatever. And this is not designed to take long. It's meant to not interrupt your mapping from a pace point of view. And then you end up in the reward room. Every room has a reward, and these vary from all the things we've talked about, fountains, affliction fountains, merchant, treasure room, and so on, or the offer one, which is the item deferral, and a whole bunch of other. I should add, there are a lot of other reward rooms we haven't shown in the live stream. Like the goal here is players explore and find stuff, so we only showed a subset in the announcement. And so after you've done that, you're right back into the map you were playing. And so it's a relatively quick process and does improve your sanctum progress or give you some actual currency with each room you play.
Yeah, for some behind the scenes insight here. For this one, we were specifically like, let's try and avoid spoilers as much as possible for like the things you can discover in the Forbidden Sanctum. So
Yeah.
there's a fair
And
bit of discovery process there.
there's a lot of discovery and there's quite a lot of story as well. Like there's an actual reason why the Sanctum has,
Cool.
got this bad person in there and what's going on with that. But we'd much prefer people actually enjoy that rather than us dumping it all on them here.
And bosses too. I'm very excited.
Yeah, lots of boss fights.
Ooh, lots. I was thinking there might just be like 2 or something. Very good. Official Arrow asks, do totems, when they take damage, lose your resolve? And I'll tack onto that minions as well.
No, they do not.
Great. Excellent. Does self-inflicted damage affect resolve?
I don't think it does. There's a lot of shrugging. No. It's only damage that's tagged with affecting your resolve, like ones from the monsters. There are some, let's say, environmental hazards in the Sanctum. You can see it briefly in some of the footage of some big molten orbs flying around and so on, and that kind of thing. An object in the middle of the room that's spewing out laser beams that rotates, for example, that stuff will hurt your resolve. But it's really telegraphed. Like it's very easy for people to deal with.
The need to swap between bossing and mapping in the Atlas trees was definitely something that felt awkward, so I'm pretty excited to learn a bit more about that change. Many of the nodes have been rolled into the game as default now for bossing, but are there any passives that remain on the Atlas tree for bossing reward stuff? I'm guessing there are still nodes, for example, to enable the Uber versions of the various bosses, at least?
Yes, there are Uber nodes still, so if you want to play the Uber fights, you can allocate the passive. But thankfully, that's a very small investment that you wouldn't do particularly often. And the main problem, which is where you feel like you have to fully spec into bosses and then fully unspec back into mapping, which is a large investment, is not there anymore. And it's worth noting the kind of people that are doing Uber pinnacle farming can afford the regrets to flick a passive on and off from time to time. But basically, the plan is that you can play bosses at any time without feeling like you have to respec your tree or you're missing out on something.
I mean, it's also important to note that the Ubers are not the default bosses now, thankfully. Very good. Some of the allocatable boss nodes made things more challenging in addition to more rewarding. So, for example, Inevitable Ambush, which added a second Guardian to the Guardian fights. Are things like this made default behavior now, or are they still passives, or are they just gone?
The ones that add extra challenge and rewards are gone for now, but this isn't a we don't like them, they're gone forever. It's a case that we want to bring them back in some form. And we have some plans for this. They probably won't be an at 320 release, but we do have some cool ways where basically the ability to opt in to the challenge and reward is not going to come from the tree because that creates the problems we've discussed, but it will come from somewhere. And so players will be able to get their challenge and reward back for those. But in the meantime, obviously, there's still a lot of ways you can ramp up the juice and challenge from these encounters.
Jack was wondering if Atlas Tree will be viewable today alongside patch notes, or is that a little bit later, maybe?
I don't think it's today, but our expectation is to release it before release so that you do get a chance to plan around it.
Okay. Reign of Pain Games asks, there was mention of boss nodes being moved from the Atlas to passive tree the bosses directly. To avoid what happened last league with loot, are there any number changes happening with the modifiers that are worth
I'm unaware
mentioning?
of any. I mean, we've tried very hard to communicate everything as clearly as we can in the patch notes. I mean, I can't promise we haven't missed anything, but we have scoured stuff in order to try to make sure it's complete, and also written the live stream and our information up based on this kind of stuff. So we are trying very hard to disclose any small changes like that which would have an impact. I'm not aware of any stuff we haven't spoken about there.
All right. Let's talk a bit about rare monsters. I think a lot of players are very happy to read the manifesto about the replacement of the archnemesis system for rare monsters with a new, more, I guess, nemesis-like system. Do you think that this new system will still achieve the goals that you set out to achieve with archnemesis, though?
So the goal of archnemesis initially was modernization of the effects and their balance. We felt that the old monster mods were just really old. We just basically needed to give them a fresh coat of paint. Now our fresh coat of paint included some stuff that players didn't like, and so we're trying very hard to make sure the new system does achieve the core goals of archnemesis without having the things that people didn't like. And so to that effect, it now does use modern effects. You know, there's a lot of cool stuff that we weren't doing with a system that was 2 systems ago, and the balance is appropriate for current Path of Exile. So it's definitely ticked those boxes, but at the same time, it's trying to be much more understandable and simple and a bit less in your face than archnemesis was.
On a very kind of just like rough feelings basis, how do you think like an old archnemesis compares to a new rare monster on average?
My impression so far is that the monsters are on average a bit easier, but the key thing is this: a previous archnemesis mod had a grab bag of stuff that it did. It generally made the monster do more damage in a generic sense. It also had an interesting thing that happened gameplay wise, and it added a bunch of defensive properties, and often more, often on multiple axes. And so it cohesively had a kind of a this is a fire, it's going to screw you up with fire in 4 different ways kind of theme. And so therefore it applied to pretty much any character, right? It would have some way of interacting with them. The new mods are very simple. The new mods say, cool, you're not going to be able to do much fire damage to me, or I'm going to do a lot of fire damage to you, or I have a magma barrier. They just do one thing. And therefore, they're very, let's just say, Boolean against certain players. I'll give an example. Let's say you run into a rare monster with 2 mods, and those 2 mods are that it will blind you and that it's resistant to fire damage. So if you're playing a cold caster, neither of those mods affects you whatsoever. They're literally nothing. And so you can kill a monster easily and it doesn't do anything extra to you. Great. And on average, you're often encountering this. But if you're playing a fire melee character, it blinds you, which is going to affect your accuracy, and the fire damage is going to be mitigated against it. This will be a harder fight. It will wake you up a bit when you encounter it. And so you're going to find this situation where a lot more monsters are just speed bumps along the way and aren't causing a problem, and sometimes there'll be one which causes you issues because of your build. And so it's quite a different experience for different players, but overall, the monsters are at a glance much simpler in terms of what they do, and you're not encountering the onerous, long, frustrating fights every single area like you were before.
See, I like that because you feel good when you're playing a build and you run into a challenge. You're like, "Ha, my build doesn't care about this at all." And you feel clever, you know. Even though it's just kind of the luck of the draw on that one, but yeah,
Yeah.
that feels good. So on the modifiers, only doing what they say, fantastic. However, there still kind of remains a problem where this information is in a small text list at the top of the screen. Have you guys explored the idea of color coding the new modifiers in some way to help players identify them, or maybe using other systems like, I don't know, little symbols or maybe like color coded glows on monsters to denote certain effects and so on?
They do have visual effects on them in many cases, so you often can see what a monster does based on what it looks like. But otherwise, what we focused on here is to succinctly and completely describe what the monster does in text. And this is a list that has more words than archnemesis, because archnemesis would have something like Flamewalker, and then what does that mean? Who knows? You'd learn, of course, but there were 70 plus of them.
Oh yeah.
And so now it specifically says what it does. This may mean more reading. It may not be a good endpoint here, right? It might be that we
Yeah.
need to make the things slightly more concise, but I'm really worried about us getting back into keywording, because part of the problem with keywording was then a player can't look at the keyword and actually understand what it does. So I don't know. Longer term, there are probably solutions here. Maybe the right answer is to put some color coding back. Currently, it's not color coded. That was something which went with the keywords in archnemesis. I mean, it could be restored, but we'd like people to play and give us some feedback. If you guys can suggest how the mods can be made further clear, so that you can easily identify them while you're playing, that's really useful. Have a go. We're open to feedback here. We want to make sure the monster mod system achieves our goals and is still easy to read.
Yeah, I think the color coding would be a good thing. It could be something that could be done gradually over time as well. Like you start with elementally aligned things are color coded alongside their elements, for
One
example.
thing we have done, and this isn't something we spoke about on the live stream, is that the text under the monsters that says like resist fire, resist cold, or vulnerable to fire, vulnerable to cold, the one that kicks in when they have approximately 15% resistance, was feeling a bit spammy alongside all these mods. Like when we're asking you
Right.
to read 2 or 3 short lines of mod text, having like resist fire, resist cold underneath it as well was quite a lot. And so we've moved those to little symbols over on the right of the life bar. And so if you're the kind of character who cares about which monsters are fire resistant, you're just glancing at symbols now rather than trying to read text. And that's helped declutter it quite a bit.
So that's great. That sounds awesome. I look forward to seeing that. Yeah, it's kind of like what I was talking about. Yeah, little symbols and life bars. Great idea. Excellent. Good to know. So let's talk about the loot goblin issue. It seems like it'll be solved by players simply just not knowing which monster is going to be the big loot pinata. Good news indeed. But how do you feel about the loot conversion system overall? Because I thought this system was quite interesting, but maybe a little bit tainted by how it was implemented. So for the unfamiliar, the loot conversion system is this new system that takes what a monster would usually drop and converts it into a new type of reward, like all currency, for example.
So we've reviewed the loot conversions and added some new ones, dropped some old ones, like the ones that just gave you piles and piles of flasks, for example. As far as I know, that doesn't exist anymore. And we've gone through and made sure to use the feedback that people have had. The special So the way it works is rare monsters drop more items than regular monsters. By itself, that should be enough reward, but we want it to be interesting, and we want people to feel like they're really, that there's an extra reason to kill rare monsters, because you could otherwise ignore them. And so you basically have these bonus drops that can occur. And bonus drops include conversions, but they also include a lot of other stuff. And
Oh.
there's a chance of getting the bonus drops that's proportional to the mods that are on the monster. For example, if a monster has 2 mods on it, then it has 2 chances to get a bonus. If it has 4 mods, it has 4 chances to get a bonus. And the individual mods have higher chances, where I believe like the more difficult ones, like for example, if there's one that's similar to one of the old Pantheon mods, and that it does, like it evokes some, god who comes and smites you, for example, then it is significantly higher. There's a significantly higher chance that it's going to have a special drop here. And what you find is when a monster has, the convergence of all of the really big mods in it, it's a hard fight. That results in there being a very high chance of one of these special drops, which is potentially a conversion or potentially one of the other ones we haven't spoken about yet. And this results in a thing where you have a lot of incentive to fight rare monsters, a lot of incentive to fight hard rare monsters, but you don't feel that you can assess a monster beforehand and then try to min-max what your exact party composition should be in order to get the maximum rewards from that fight. We've also tried to smooth this out a bit more. Like the thing in the past where you could potentially, under the right circumstances, get dozens and dozens of divines from a monster, and then everyone else feels like they're getting nothing, wasn't great. So we're trying to make sure that there are still spikes, but it's a bit less spiky than before. There's a bit more spread across all of the different things, and a lot of the bad options are a bit better now.
A lot more variety too, it sounds like. Is this something you've considered doing to map bosses as well? Like, map bosses have definitely gotten better over time in terms of reward and more interesting, which I like. But it still seems like, in a lot of cases, they could get a little spicier.
It's worth looking into. Yeah, we've been focusing this cycle on trying to get the monster mods into a good place and to scrub all the archnemesis off everything.
Yes. Oh, feels good.
Those power washing videos, it's like that.
Yeah, I'll get my gurney out and hose off the arch nemesis filth. Oh dear. Definitely threw me there. A lot of people in chat asked, how will Headhunter work with the new monster mods?
Okay, this is the first question we were expecting. There are way more mods now, and that means Headhunter players that are getting a lot of mods cap out later. Previously, because there were relatively few archnemesis mods, I mean, there were still dozens to be fair, but there were fewer. Once you've got them all active, you can't get more. Whereas here, there are far more mods, and so you can have far more upper end power. Having said that, these do less than the archnemesis mods because that's what you asked us to do. And so they do implicitly, like at the low end, Headhunter is less powerful. At the high end, Headhunter is more powerful. You pick which is best.
It's a kind of a slower ramp up to a higher potential sort of deal. You asked for
And
this.
we're calling Headhunter Vaal Cleave now.
Excellent. Immortalum asks, does that mean no more fractured flasks because of the flask thing being removed?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the flask conversion is gone. That and the like piles of whetstones ones are 2 examples.
The monster drops in the fracture conversion.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll fracture regular flask drops.
Okay. Simple Cookie asks, will the Atlas passive that increase the amount of mods on rare monsters be added back with the new rare monster changes?
I don't think it has been. Do you know that? Yeah. I mean, we certainly discussed it, but we want to kind of get a vanilla experience here of how many rare monster mods is appropriate. An issue with feedback is if there are ways to juice it up and then people say there are too many mods, we don't know if they necessarily had that active. So we'll consider it for the future. But, you know, this has been year of rare monster mods, so let's just try this new system and see if people appreciate the changes, and then we can look at further changes to it.
It's been a wild ride, Chris. All right. Recently you swapped kind of divine and exalted orbs around. Now that we've had a league with the various changes surrounding these high-end currencies, I'd like to know what were the goals of effectively swapping divines and exalts, and how effective have the changes been?
Well, the goals were that exalts were used more for crafting, that someone would actually consider taking an item and using an exalted orb to get another mod that is random. That's happening now, a lot more than it was before. Secondly, we wanted it to be harder to divine items, not just because we're mean, but because it makes well-rolled uniques more valuable. Previously, because divines were really accessible, well, relatively accessible, it meant that if you have a really rolled unique, it didn't really feel that special because someone can slam a few divines into it to get something like that. Now there is quite a wide variance of stuff. Like look at something like Brass Dome, for example, where the the worst versions of it are worth quite a lot less than the really good ones. And that's more fun because then you find something that's just a much better version of something that someone else has that's worth less and you feel good about that. These goals were achieved, right? Like it certainly is harder to divine items. It is easier to exalt them. The economy survived. Life goes on. We'll continue to make broad changes whenever we feel like it that affect the economy, but it's sometimes good to just cause a bit of a shift in how people value items so you don't get entrenched values. You don't get people believing, oh, this item is 6x forever. You know, it changes because the game changes.
So for the standard players that are still coping with their stash full of exalts because they didn't convert them over in time.
This is like, seriously, like, oh, I had entirely all my money in Bitcoin and now it's worthless, right? Like, diversify, right? Again, economics.
Chris is teaching multiple economics lessons today.
Market Exile will set you up for life. Have a diversified portfolio of currency items.
Okay.
And
It's really
currency. Keep some rares, keep some crafting stuff. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you got to invest in some high-end one-of-a-kind items, right?
Some old skin maps, maybe alternate.
Yeah.
I found out I have this red beak on my account from the early race seasons. Like I'm talking, I logged in to do races back in 2013 to literally test they were working and got an alternate art red beak, and now it's worth a mirror in standard.
Wait, is it? I'm pretty sure I have one of those.
Well, I mean that was just with a quick search, but yeah. So invest in a variety of different items in your standard portfolio if you don't want to get wrecked by economic changes.
If only I played in standard, I'd be rich. It's so good. It's interesting to see some new Vaal skills. It's certainly been a while. I tried to look up exactly when, and I think 3.3 Incursion was the last time, which was get ready, 17 leagues ago. So powerful, longer cooldown or like ultimate skills can make gameplay quite a bit more engaging, I think. And a lot of people love Vaal skills for that reason. It's certainly an underutilized skill category, though, not something you add new skills to all the time. So how do you decide then whether to make a skill, a Vaal skill, or just a regular skill that does a similar thing?
Well, if we're trying to come up with an ultimate skill, Vaal skills are ones that we have a control over you only using periodically, whereas regular skills, we generally don't put big cooldowns on them unless there's a bypassable thing. So if it's something where there's a good cooldown bypass mechanism, then it will probably be a regular skill. Now, the thing we're doing with Vaal skills here is we want to buff melee. There are a number of like you may be thinking, wow, that's a lot of changes to melee, or you may be thinking, where are all the melee changes, depending on whether you happen to notice stuff. But the changes to endgame unique weapons affect melee. The Vaal skill stuff affects melee in a way I'll discuss in a second. There's a bunch of other bits and pieces, like melee splash is being added to as a node on the passive tree. And we have some, I'm not supposed to talk about the details because it's secret, but you'll find there's some totem mastery that affects melee in an interesting way. So there's a few bits and pieces that together actually do make quite a cohesive set of melee buffs. But the theory with the Vaal ones is we targeted a set of weaker melee skills where previously, if the player is using that skill, they just do the damage they were doing. And rather than just saying, oh, we're going to give the skill a little bit more damage, which has various issues, we've created a Vaal version, which at face value means that every X attacks, you get to do a more powerful one, which is an indirect buff. But we've tried to design many of these Vaal skills so that they also directly buff the main version, like Vaal Cleave is an example, where if you're using Vaal Cleave occasionally, your cleaves themselves are more powerful. And so it's doing a more powerful attack sometimes and increasing the power of your other attacks the rest of the time. And because of the change where using the Vaal gem gives you the regular version of the skill, then there's no excuse not to be using Vaal Cleave if you were playing a Cleave character. And so overall, there are a lot of Vaal skills there that cause melee characters to be quite a lot more powerful. It also meant that we could, for example, target skills that we felt needed it. Now, when you see the patch notes in a little bit, you'll notice there's a small nerf to Lightning Strike, right? And you may be thinking, well, if we're trying to buff melee, what are you doing nerfing Lightning Strike? And the answer is it's far, 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 far better than the other melee skills. And so we're buffing the category, but that doesn't mean that every skill needs to come out entirely, entirely with additional damage on it. And so you'll find that melee overall is more powerful, but within the melee category, there's quite a lot more options available than there were before.
A Vaal skill is then a concept that's likely to carry forth into Path of Exile 2 with its altered skill fit, I guess a system even.
No comment.
Okay, nice. Frozen Legion is a pretty big news as well. So to clarify, for people who missed a particular detail about it, it's actually a spell that summons statues that then attack with your weapon, right?
Yep, that's
Super
correct.
cool. A spell attack. So you've done it now. There's nothing to stop you from casting a spell that shoots your bow's arrow or attack that casts a spell that then does another attack. So is this something you're going to explore more potentially?
I'd say consider this as a hint at the way we're designing some Path of Exile 2 skills.
A little bit more going on. I like it. Very cool. We have a couple extra chat questions here. Oh, everyone was asking about divine shards. Yeah, I see your chat. I see you spamming divine shards. Okay, everyone wants to know, are divine shards going to be a thing? Chris?
They're called Chaos Orbs. Shards have problems. Okay, so we designed Path of Exile to get away from the concept of there being a homogeneous gold currency in games, right? And I understand every league we do, we introduce gold in it, but that's, within the confines of that particular scope. But overall, in main Path of Exile, we want to make sure that the currency items have fluctuating values relative to each other. It's very important as part of the way that trade works. And so taking something like Divine Orbs that are the de facto currency for high-end trades and adding a granular, proportional, like Divine Sense thing is not something that we would do unless there was a good reason for it. And so we'd have no plans to add divine shards. We think it would potentially be negative. It's okay to use cheaper currency as the divine shards. Like you can take chaos orbs and turn them into divines through trade or other mechanisms. The value fluctuates, but that's what we want it to be doing.
All right. Booze Addicts asks, do the clones from the new skills count as minions? That'll be the Frozen Legion. I only ever saw them referred to as statues.
They do not.
The clones
Right.
like Vaal Double Strike or General Strike.
Yeah, so it's like Vaal Double Strike, for example.
The attack on to plane asks, does Vaal Flicker attack one target multiple times? So does it have like boss applications then, or is it more about pack clear?
Against a single target, it will do every single hit against that target.
Very anime. Cool.
Mhm.
Okay.
It is very anime, yes.
Let's talk crafting and league mechanics a little bit. So challenge leagues in Path of Exile have always been a place for you guys to experiment with systems. Some of them intended to go core, if they work out, for example, but otherwise, others are like never really intended to go core and they're just specifically for that. But even in that case, I imagine there's a chance that they can give you some useful information to inform future design. So crafting systems have been a bit of a trend lately, I notice, with leagues, like Sentinel Recombinators, for example, and Lake of Calandra Mirroring. Some of these crafting systems end up being particularly liked by the players too. I think people really like the recombinators. Are these sorts of new crafting systems designed with becoming core features in mind, or are they more experiments to explore future design possibilities? And is crafting system something that you're keen to keep experimenting with?
We want to introduce something new in every league, a new way of getting items, or a new thing you can do with items. We found that if we leave it in the game just as a de facto thing, then you accumulate dozens and dozens and dozens of systems that create both power creep and complexity creep for the way the crafting works. And that's good. Path of Exile is meant to have that stuff, and power creep is natural, and there's no big problem there. But we have found that introducing stuff like recombinators and then turning it off until we've had a good think about how it fits in is probably safer. Like, a lot of expectations with Harvest would have been reduced if we hadn't reintegrated it into the game before we were ready to and before we fully understood the consequences of that. And so with the mist from Lake of Calandra or the recombinators, we are looking for ways that we can bring them back. And we do plan to continue to introduce systems like this, some of which will stick around, some of which won't. An example is sanctified relics in the Sanctum offer a lot of character power, and that's a Sanctum specific thing. We don't expect that sanctified relics will necessarily exist after Sanctum is finished. Maybe we make it core, maybe we don't, maybe we keep them, maybe we don't, but they're a thing for that league that let you experiment with builds that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. There are a lot of things in there which let you push your build further than you normally would, and that's something that's cool about the Sanctum League. It may be that it becomes a permanent part of Path of Exile later, and we are looking for ways to bring stuff back. Like, I don't know if this is actually a thing, but at least in our planning, one of the things that the monster mods could cause, you know how they have those special drops that occur that we were speaking about a few minutes ago, one of the things that they could drop was the mist that mirrors from Calandra, for example, the one that gives you the 2 currency items. I don't know what form that will be in. If it's in 320, we're still sorting out the details of some of the exotic ones like that. But that's an example of us taking a system that was used as a reward mechanic for a league and then making it a rare reward from another system in the game.
Cool. Speaking of things that potentially can come back in the future, is there any word on Ultimatum?
Ultimatum is split into 2 pieces. There's the boss fights with the uniques. They're back in the game, as of like last league, I think, or the one before. Time is a blur. And then there's the actual Ultimatum mechanic. Now, we have a plan for the Ultimatum mechanic, and we've mentioned there is a plan for a while, and that plan is not due yet, but it is coming at some point until it changes. Having said that, the offer/deferral system in Sanctum does feel a lot like it. This is where we say, here is a thing, or you can keep going in order to double it, essentially, but with quite a lot more doubling going on. And so players who liked the risk of Ultimatum will certainly like that mechanic.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see the parallel there. Very briefly, just 2 small questions on Ruthless. How has the player interest and reception been to the Ruthless Alpha from your perspective?
The alpha testers are very positive. That's really good to see. I'm glad to see they're enjoying it. And hopefully those who couldn't get into the alpha and who are interested in that mode can have a chance to check it out when it launches alongside 320.
All right. Is Ruthless a mode that you want to keep making changes to long term, like rebalancing skills specifically for the mode, for example?
We will do some Ruthless specific skill balance. Currently, the focus was on getting fundamentals in place, like getting the mode to function. And then if we find time later, we'll be able to use it to make whatever changes are needed on specific skills. And to some extent, with, as you know, with the way Path of Exile works, if there's a skill that's dominant and somewhat trivializing stuff, then we won't have any qualms about ruthlessly nerfing that in that mode. Now, there's a fundamental philosophy difference, right? A player who's playing the main game will get upset if we nerf their skills. And this is because it's the way they like to play Path of Exile. If we just decide we hate minion characters one day, then all these people who come to Path of Exile to enjoy playing minion characters as a reliable way they can engage with the game would be upset that now they can't do the thing they like. In Ruthless, all bets are off. We will make whatever changes we feel like, and it will stay hard, and you will have to adapt. And, you know, the Ruthless players are big boys. They can deal with this. And it should be fine. So we will make some skill-specific changes, and very likely that those changes are not the same as balance changes that we do in the core game. In the core game, we want to make sure all the archetypes are viable and there's good diversity and that kind of stuff. But in Ruthless, we have other objectives.
I'm going to spam you with some uncategorized random questions from chat now.
Brilliant.
Kyle MC asks, how does quantity and rarity affect the Sanctum? And I'll append to that another question I saw someone ask. Map mods don't affect the Sanctum, right? It's a separate zone.
Yeah, your map mods do not affect the Sanctum. Quantity and rarity on your character will affect your drops you get from the monsters, I believe, right? there are monsters in the Sanctum that you can kill, and they drop items. So it's not like, the goal is that when you're mapping, it doesn't reduce the amount of item drops you're getting by going and playing in the Sanctum. You do get drops, and those monsters are technically unique monsters, so technically they're pretty juiced, and quantum rarity do affect that. So going into the Sanctum, killing some monsters is roughly similar to killing monsters in the map that you came from, plus all the Sanctum rewards on top.
Damaris asks, how endgame is the new mechanic? So that'd be Sanctum. Does that you encounter that on like the first beach as you start the campaign, or does it kick in later?
Yep, kicks in right at the beginning. So basically, you start doing your first Sanctum at level like 2 or whatever. As you get into the coast, and you probably won't get very far in those Sanctum runs, but it's a good opportunity to start learning, start accumulating some relics and so on. And you'll need them because later on it gets really hard. There are some things in the Sanctum, like the special endgame uniques, that can only be dropped if you are very high in maps, because they're very, very powerful pinnacle things. But yeah, it does play throughout the entire campaign.
Will our Starforges or Lionized Glares sitting in Standard be buffable to their Headhunter tier strengths with a Divine Orb?
Yep. I know, it's stupid, isn't it? But we had to do that because it's fair and because of divination cards that you could have been hoarding and all the other things. So yeah, you get some free ridiculous items in Standard if you had diversified into them.
Standard chat trade is exploding right now. Excellent.
Someone says stonks. That's great.
FDXPO asks, with endgame unique weapons becoming more rare, what about their respective divination cards, like Starforges, for example?
Yes, we are adjusting the divination cards. This means in Standard, the old divination cards are now worth more.
Man with Hat, any plans to decouple melee from buffs granted by totems, Ancestral Protector or War Chief?
This is actually a hot topic internally. I don't know the answer.
Okay.
I think it's the case where our designers acknowledge this is a problem and are looking for solutions, but maybe we've doubled down on it a little bit in this one because of that totem mastery I mentioned before. You'll see what I mean.
Wait and see. Doug Izzle asks, will Ruthless launch on console at League launch too?
I believe so. Yeah.
Theory Crafter and many other people ask, is Reforge keep prefix/suffix coming back in some shape or form? Speaking of things coming back.
I'm not aware of it coming back. No, sorry.
All right. Spooky asks, Chris, can you please share your current thoughts on the loss of the historic buff to loot? There you go. That's a big one.
So this is one of those tricky things where we feel people completely misunderstood what is there, and we didn't want to go on a big rant and try to correct people, but we posted some numbers at some point during the league and then left it. But it boils down to this: if you're a regular player playing regular content, as we can see based on looking at what regular players are doing, and by regular I mean people in red maps, then there is no loss of anything. It's better than it was before. Sentinel is higher than it was previously, and people didn't believe us. They said doubt. They weren't happy with that, so we just stopped trying to push the point. If you were one of those groups that were juicing stuff to insane degrees with 6-person parties and all the crazy stuff going on and using exactly the right league mechanics with exactly the right stuff, then yeah, absolutely there was a nerf there. And for some reason, the community feeling about this was that we nerfed the average person. It's a little bit of a Robin Hood thing where we tried to take from the rich and give to the poor, and the communication around the whole thing was poorly done. We didn't explain it, patch note it correctly. We didn't communicate about it. We didn't really understand the nature of the changes fully ourselves. But where we got it to with the buffs we did was better than where it was before, unless you were doing one of the crazy juice situations. And so it was frustrating for us because we felt that the miscommunication had the miscommunication is our fault, but we felt the whole situation kind of ran away and caused people to really hate the loot situation more than they should have done. I think that this has taught us a lot of lessons about communication, but there's no need to further improve drops related to that. The amount of currency and stuff that you're getting, and uniques, in fact, especially uniques that you're getting for regular gameplay involving a variety of different leagues, does exceed what it was in 3.18. It's just that if you're playing the crazy Imperium style stuff as we describe it, then you're certainly getting less, and that was an intentional part of the change.
Has there been some sort of change to the way that you're approaching the reveals and the patch noting and stuff? Maybe with how you're describing some things, because you don't historically you've never revealed everything. There's a lot of stuff that's considered not in patch notable changes, for example. Has that changed at all over time?
Historically, we've tried very hard not to talk about drop rate changes. If we feel that something drops too often, we'll just change it. And for decades, well, not decades, but more than a decade, we have followed that policy. Having said that, we should have talked about the changes to the quantity and rarity bonuses from different league content, because it does affect decisions people are making. There was stuff before that was really juicy and everyone wanted to play that. And we tried to make it more fair so that the leagues are roughly equal. And that's something that should have been communicated more clearly. And we certainly learned the lesson there. And the lack of communication there was not malicious. It was entirely just like, ignorance on our part. There was miscommunications internally. I missed the memo almost literally. And that meant that it wasn't as much part of the marketing as it should have been. And we certainly have tried very hard this time not to make the same mistake again.
All right. Good to hear. Thank you very much for the insights, Chris, and thank you for spending this time together with us, the Q&A. I'll let you get to it, and we'll let him release the patch notes so that everyone can have a read. Thank you very much.
Enjoy, everyone. Thanks so much.
See you later, everyone.